Everyone get out!
Hello tankers and tankettes, welcome to a What Tank video. This is going to be slightly different than the normal ones though. I have basically covered every other tank class up until now, apart from Arty. This isn't quite going to be the same format though. In fact, this is going to be more examining artillery in a different light. This is going to be the artillery problem, because I think there is an artillery problem. Also, apparently my attempts to disguise the FV207 with Bert on the side are not successful. People don't think it is an actual Bert. Somehow they see through that careful camouflage. I will, just before we, I mean, I'm watching this and saying this as I'm watching this replay, so I apologise in advance if my thoughts are a little disjointed. This one's going to be maybe a bit more stream of consciousness than normal, but one of the reasons I have been thinking more about this issue lately is because I have been playing artillery lately. I got the Bert because, well, it's a lot different than any other artillery. It's very fast. There are a lot of things you can do that you can't really do, and just the attraction to a fast tank, basically, because you can do silly things in fast tanks that you can't do in other tanks. And if you strap a big howitzer on that fast tank, then sometimes that gets even sillier. And then, as you were playing it, you get the next one unlocked, and at that point I started to think, well, I'm further down this line than I am any other artillery line. And actually, I would like a mastery, a technical mastery ace, what the heck is it called? The national thing, where you've got all tanks on a particular research tree unlocked. And by the way, the reticle in this replay is completely derpy. I don't know why. It's not like my ping was that bad. This is something to do with the replay itself. So, out of that grew a desire to actually get a technical whatever it is badge. And okay, I could do it on a line where there's no artillery. I could play the Chinese tanks, for instance, or the Japanese tanks. The thing is, I'm already... The reason I decided to stick with it on the British is, A, because I was already more than halfway down the artillery line. I actually enjoy playing British mediums. I enjoy the British heavies. I'm quite far up on all the lines, and going with the Japanese or the Chinese would involve starting from much further back, and it would also involve playing tanks that I don't really want to play that much. Not that I want to play artillery particularly, but I've just decided it's a thing I want to do. I've been playing the World of Tanks for all this time, and I've never even come close to having one of those. Also, I'm going to interrupt myself again. I've got the 5.5-inch gun on this. I didn't have the top gun as of playing this particular match, so bear that in mind as well. That's why I'm firing so quickly. So, the artillery problem. Artillery has been around in World of Tanks for a very long time, and I don't know if it's actually been in from the beginning, or if it was... I don't know. But the original intent was that it was there to counter all of the heavy tanks that were rolling around, because World of Tanks has changed quite considerably over the years. The ecosystem of World of Tanks, the variety of tanks that are in the game, for people that are new to the game, they might not realise that haven't always been tier 10 heavies or tier 10 tank destroyers, for instance. For a while, all you could have at the top tiers were heavy tanks. And in that context, artillery starts to make a bit more sense. And in the context of also, and this was something Fosh pointed out to me when I was airing these thoughts on the stream at one point, that back in the day, the only way you could get premium ammo was for actual money, was for actual gold. So there were more heavies around, and there were more tanks that couldn't pen those heavies because they didn't have access to, or they weren't willing to spend actual money to buy premium ammunition. So in that context, having some kind of counter to heavies makes sense, because in theory, World of Tanks is a kind of a rock, paper, scissors kind of proposition. It's that kind of game, everything counters everything else, kind of. Not really. But you've got various classes counter other classes, and artillery is there to counter the really heavily armoured heavy tanks that, or even tank destroyers that other tanks would otherwise find tough. But now that premium ammunition is actually available to everybody for credits, that makes less sense these days. So we're left with a class of vehicles that, in some ways, they don't really have a place on the battlefield with the current ecosystem. And I think even if you like artillery, you can acknowledge that it's immensely annoying to be hit for a lot of damage from the other side of the map by a tank that you can't do anything about, basically. Now, something to note, also in the old days, there wasn't a such thing as an artillery cap. And also, this was before artillery was nerfed as well. And again, it probably made more sense back then. But the fact that there wasn't an artillery gap, it got to be artillery cap even. It got to be a problem in terms of numbers, and that was the reason why Wargaming introduced the cap and actually nerfed artillery in some ways when the 8.6 accuracy changes came out. Everyone else's accuracy got better, but artillery's effectively stayed the same, and they got also longer shell travel times, and I think there were also some maybe longer aim times as well, I'm not sure. But the cap made a huge difference. There were certain tanks before that people just didn't play. I really like the mouse, but back in those days, nobody played it because there were, you know, 8, 9, 10 artillery on a team, sometimes more. And why would you play a mouse in that that kind of environment, or a T95, or anything slow-moving? That's British tank destroyers out the window, for starters. So you can see why the ecosystem was unbalanced, and it wasn't the fact that these are hard-hitting vehicles that can hit you from the entire map away that made Wargaming actually implement these changes. It was the fact that just so many people were playing them that, especially at the top tiers of the game, nobody wanted to play the top tiers because it was just getting absolutely ridiculous. It is better these days, and it's better in terms of numbers. Even 5 still feels like a lot in a match, but you don't see 5 that often. When you do see them, it's annoying, it is. But it is undoubtedly better than it used to be. No one wants 12 artillery per side. That is just, that makes no sense whatsoever. And Wargaming did finally come to their senses on that one. Although there are a lot of people, I will point this out, that would like fewer, you know, only 3 or even 2 per team. Anyway, it's also worth pointing out that in comparison to the real-life vehicles, artillery is in fact one of the most nerfed classes in the entire game. Now, there are a lot of things Wargaming have done to balance the parameters of different tanks to try and, you know, take a historically informed view of what various vehicles were capable of, but things like, for instance, turret traverse on every tank in the game is unnaturally good, basically. No tank had a turret traverse as good as it does in World of Tanks, pretty much. And if you look at what they've done with War Thunder, for instance, there is it's much closer to reality with turret traverse. That's one of the ways in which War Thunder feels quite different. Not necessarily bad, though, but certainly different. Artillery in real life could hit things from ranges of thousands of meters, kilometers away, whereas in game it's in the range of hundreds of meters. And in terms of the damage the shells do as well, it feels like a lot. I mean, it really does feel like a lot when you're driving a tank, but again, in comparison to real life artillery, it's considerably nerfed. You know, a 183mm artillery shell, such as, I think it's 183 that the CGC fires? I can't remember. But there's some big guns out there. There's 200mm Arty guns, there's the whatever the T92 has. These would have basically flattened entire buildings. And they can and will one-shot tanks, but it's also possible to survive a shot from an artillery like that. But you're going to be sorry afterwards, you're going to feel very sorry for yourself. But this is just another way in which I feel that the balance for artillery doesn't really fit in the game. It's always been a kind of an awkward bodge to get artillery in there and to have it on the same battlefield as all the other tanks. And like I've said, I can see kind of why it was there to start with, but Wargaming, in going down that route, have kind of they've sort of painted themselves into a corner, because now it's in there. Now so many people have got artilleries and have played artilleries. To remove it as a class entirely from the game would annoy a lot of people, and they'd have to recompense a lot of credits and a lot of XP, and suddenly you'd have a lot of people that have this massive gamut of free XP and credits just lying around. And that would, at least in the short term, that would really make the game economy go a bit haywire. There are a lot of people that have artillery sitting around in the garage. Even if they don't, they've unlocked artillery. So even just from the point of view of having a lot of free XP, Wargaming probably don't want that. You know, as a player, I don't think it would particularly make a difference. But from Wargaming's point of view, that's less people spending money on the game to convert to free XP, and you know, you can see why they wouldn't want that. But as it is, it's so firmly entrenched. Some people like playing artillery. I don't quite know why, to be honest, because the ideal is that as an artillery you are helping your team with indirect fire support, but you have to contrast that with the fact of artillery being in a match drastically alters how that match will play out. It alters how people will behave, and it also alters... I mean, supposedly, the logic from Wargaming, the rationale has been that on maps, that maps with no cover, or even maps with a bit of cover, it's supposed to stop people from camping. It's supposed to stop static games. It's supposed to stop, like a T-95 holding up an entire flank, for instance. But the thing is, on the maps they've put in recently, and even just a lot of the maps, that isn't really so much an issue, because if you've still got mediums alive, if you've got light tanks alive, if you're in that situation, then ideally there should be some flanking going on, and the mediums and lights should be taking advantage of their mobility to get round behind. So there's the teamwork that, in the ideal World of Tanks is supposed to foster between two random groups of people. Of course, it doesn't always work like that. It probably hardly ever works like that, but that's kind of what the game should be aiming for. And instead, what actually happens is you have a game like this with a couple of artillery, and it has so drastically changed the nature of the game. It's made things much more campy. People don't want to push because they know if they get spotted out in the open, there's a very good chance that artillery will really punish them. And it makes, especially the more powerful units, you know, if I'm in a game with a mouse on, say, Westfield and there's 3 enemy artillery, I'm like, okay, whatever happens, I'm going to have a bad game. This is not going to be fun for me. And this is very apparent when playing artillery as well. Because every time I hit somebody or track somebody or even one-shot somebody, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm ruining somebody's day to some small extent, and I'm kind of adversely affecting it feels like I'm adversely affecting the dynamicism of the match, of how this match is going to go. I'm making it more static. And it does feel like that when I've played artillery, and especially on some maps. It's way more pronounced on some maps than others. It just results in such campy games. And Swamp is, I think, one of the worst ones. Kamarin's one of the worst ones. I don't know, there are others around. And also, there's the element of the fact that RNG is just so strong with artillery. I mean, I'm trying to be kind of balanced with this video, but from a very personal perspective, I just find, like that shot there, for instance, even if you've got an artillery, the reticle aimed perfectly, even if you are looking at a stationary target or even a tracked target or something like that, the chances are that you'll still just miss. Because the RNG is so strong with artillery that it is incredibly frustrating when you have a really critical shot. Especially, you're in a situation like this. Time is ticking down. We're approaching the 1 minute mark. This match has taken such a long time, and I genuinely believe that's because there were artillery on each side. It's not the quickest map either way, but it's just... It's crucial. There are moments like this when it's really crucial, and in any tank RNG control you, but it's so much more magnified in artillery. And I think, to be honest, the only kind of the only kind of counter that artillery really provides these days is matches where you do actually have a lot of tank destroyers on each team, and they if they're just not being very active, if you've got a lot of tank destroyers that are just camping, and the game is very static because of that reason. And again, this is something that Wargaming, that they've done some little nerfs to high tier tank destroyers. They've done nerfs to the camouflage bonuses that, or they're going to do nerfs to the camouflage bonuses that tank destroyers get. And there we go, with like 5 seconds to spare. Yeah. That again, it's not because there are it's not because there are tier 10 tank destroyers around with really powerful guns and people just camping. It's the numbers of them that concern Wargaming, that are throwing the ecosystem out of balance. So that is, I think, really, it feels like the only kind of vestigial purpose that artillery has is to try and counter that. But that's not really on purpose. That's just because there are tank destroyers around with a lot of very powerful guns. And actually, you know, it's hardly empirical evidence, but it feels like that vast increase in high-tier tank destroyers happened after the artillery nerfs and the artillery cap, that we started to see at the high tiers increasing numbers, that there was an exodus away of artillery players to these very high-powered machines that have big guns that are able to sit quite far from the enemy and deal out tremendous amounts of damage. And hey, sounds familiar, right? So again, this has created an imbalance problem. But the thing is, World of Tanks has always been... it's an unstable system, and it's the same with any online game. Things shift. Player patterns change, the numbers of vehicles that people are playing, the types of vehicles, and the way Wargaming responds to this, it seems to be based on numbers of people playing vehicles. I think you find this in all tank types, where you've got, for instance, a particular kind of vehicle, like say the Hellcat, and this is one that was nerfed back in one of the 8-point-something patches, because a lot of people were playing it, and it was just really too good. People were actually using it as a scout because it just drove around so well and it was so fast. So it always seems to me like Wargaming do these things based on numbers of people doing things, and it's only relatively recently that they've started to pay a bit more attention to individual tank types. And I say a bit more recently, we're talking maybe like the last year and a half, whatever. But it's still... For Wargaming to really change a whole class or something like that, there has to be some serious imbalance going on. And with artillery, previously, it was just the sheer numbers of them. And I still do think that there is a problem with artillery in the game. But the thing is, having said everything that I've said, I don't have any real solutions to it. I mean, you could have a stricter artillery cap, and then you would have maybe fewer people playing, or you'd have fewer in individual matches, but you might have more matches with artillery. But on the other hand, maybe people would have, you know, the people that are playing artillery still would have increased queuing times and think, oh, okay, I'll go and play some other tank more often than I play artillery. So maybe it wouldn't change. I don't know. There's no way to know that without really implementing it and seeing what happens. And Wargaming are always slightly wary of doing that sort of thing. I, for one, would not be terribly sad if artillery was taken out of the game entirely, and I know a lot of people wouldn't. But some people would, and as I've said, I don't think Wargaming are likely to do that. So I don't really know, to be honest. I'm sure this will provoke some discussion in the comments section below. I would appreciate it very much if it could be kept to a civil tone. I know there aren't that many really divisive subjects in World of Tanks, but this is definitely one of them. But I will be interested to see what kind of discussion that this provokes and what ideas people throw out as to what could be done to make artillery... To stop it from making the game less fun, because I think that's the big strike against it. Any match where you see a bunch of artillery, especially at high tiers, high-powered artillery, they can make a match a grind. They can make it even a win can just be, it can be either deathly boring because everyone's camping, no one wants to move, or it can just be such a slog because, you know, artillery keeps targeting you and managing to miss or whatever. I honestly think it is, generally speaking, a detriment to the game. It hurts more than it helps, even though sometimes it does, I will acknowledge, help. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you like the video or dislike the fact I'm playing artillery, well, you know where the buttons for that are. You can subscribe to my channel, you can check out some of my other What Tanks videos, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.